permission, sir?
Permission granted.
What is this nothing you talk about?
your permission, sir. With your permission, sir. With your permission, sir.
Permission granted.
Engage impulse engines. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Welcome to TR News, your home for transnational rationale. Join today's trek through the stars, illuminated from the oil of a proverbial blessed olive tree, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Truth guides its purveyors to the light, and truth derived from reason is omniscient. I'm your telepathic rhetorician, and this is today's news. Welcome, and don't forget to join the journey towards a better tomorrow. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe can help to continue our mission to journalistically go where no news vlog has gone before. Make it so. Egypt meets with Hamas and the PIJ. We have an article from CSI.com. Palestinian Islamic Jihad delegation heads to Egypt amid tensions. On January 6, 26 Israeli forces raided the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied northern West Bank, killed 9 Palestinians and wounded 16 others. Gaza, a delegation of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, will head to Egypt on Thursday. This is before the meeting. We'll get to the fallout of the meeting and the meeting itself as we go through the story. On Thursday for dialogue on diffusing the escalating tensions between Israel and Palestine, an official said. Dawood Shahab, a PIJ leader from Gaza, told reporters that the group's Secretary General, Ziad al-Nakhala, at the invitation of Egypt, will lead the delegation to discuss the escalating violence in the West Bank and Jerusalem with Egyptian security intelligence officials. The meeting comes after a series of deadly incidents in the region. On January 26, Israeli forces raided the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied northern West Bank, killed 9 Palestinians and wounded 16 others. A day later, a gunman opened fire on people near a synagogue at a Jewish settlement in East Jerusalem, killing at least 7 people. And Egypt has been mediating between Israel and the Palestinians and brokered several ceasefire arguments to end hostilities in the region. So there's a general take on it. I wanted to emphasize this idea that there's a governance of the Gaza Strip, and that governance is the democratically elected Hamas. Very important to note. And here's another article. This is from jwire.com AU. Hamas message to Islamic Strip, or to Islamic Jihad, interested in calm of Gaza Strip. An official, and this is from February 7th, an official in the Gaza Strip told TPS Monday it is widely believed that Hamas will not respond by shooting at Israel from within the Gaza Strip following the killing of the 7 terrorists in the Akbar Jabbar refugee camp near Jericho Monday morning. I'm not sure that this article will get through the entire thing just based on the language, the bias of the language, but Yahya Sinwar, the Palestinian leader of Hamas, is in the Gaza Strip here. A senior PA official says in a conversation with TPS that the Palestinian authorities demanded from the U.S. Secretary of State the cessation of unilateral measures on the part of Israel, including the construction in the so-called settlements, the training of the outpost, the expropriation of Tarafat lands, and the status quo at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Here's another. This is from The Cradle. It's a West Asian news source. Hamas rejects U.S. security plan during Egypt summit report. So this is post. Previous reports called Washington's security plan problematic as it did not require any concessions from Tel Aviv and called for the formation of a special force to counter the resistance. A delegation from Hamas rejected a U.S. draft security plan during a meeting with Egyptian intelligence officials in Cairo. They called for the Palestinian resistance group to stop its work in the West Bank and inside the cities occupied in 1948, according to sources that spoke with Lebanese daily Al-Akhbar. The arrival of the Hamas delegation on 8 February, led by Politburo Chief Ismail Haniyeh, came just days after a similar visit by a Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
We have the evidence, no one can dispute.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
Let us. So I do know that Ismail Haniyeh is a former leader of Hamas, and he headed over with the delegation. Yahya Sinwar, who was mentioned in the last article, is the current leader. Per the report, Egyptian officials presented Hamas with the U.S. security plan and transmitted Washington's desire to see a de-escalation of tensions in the occupied territory. In response to this, the resistance officials highlighted that Washington's plan only wants to guarantee security for Israel and doesn't take into account Palestinians' rights or the severe abuses they suffer under the occupation. And even with this, I'm not exactly sure the entire orientation of this person's political perspective or this source's political perspective, but to use the term Palestinian and juxtapose that with Israel as opposed to Israeli doesn't recognize the land Palestine. The officials also stressed again, Palestine is to Palestinians as Israel is to Israelis. The officials also stressed that the escalation of violence is led by the Israeli government and its apartheid policies, which include near-daily raids of West Bank neighborhoods, attacks on Muslims and Christian holy sites, the illegal expansion of so-called settlements, and the continued murder of civilians. In light of the Israeli crimes, it's impossible to talk about calming the situation in the occupied territories, the Hamas delegation reportedly told the Egyptian officials. Over 35 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces since the beginning of the year, according to a Palestinian human rights report. At least 10 Israelis have been killed in separate shootings, attacks in occupied Jerusalem. The Hamas delegation also stressed that the resistance is determined to respond to the provocations of Israel's far-right government, particularly those of National Security Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Hamas will not remain silent on the plans to Judaize the city of Jerusalem, expel Jerusalemites, and demolish their homes. What Hamas proved during the Battle of the Sword of Jerusalem will not be undone, the officials went on to say. That's Bezalel Smotrich, and we do know Itamar Ben-Gvir. We'll be unpacking them in future episodes. Maybe next week we'll do some really extensive journalism on them, related to them. So that's from the Cradle. We also have Al-Mayadeen here. Sources to Al-Mayadeen: PIJ, Egypt, failed to show new breakthrough. Palestinian sources told Al-Mayadeen that the talks mainly revolved around the movement's activity in Jenin and Qom in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank. This is Secretary General of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad al-Naqallah. Palestinian sources confirmed to Al-Mayadeen on Sunday that the Cairo talks between the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Egyptian General Intelligence Directorate failed to show any new breakthrough. According to the sources, discussions revolved around the movement's activity in Jenin and Qom in the occupied West Bank and are to continue today. It also made clear that the Israeli occupation wants the resistance to preserve calm and for PIJ not to take action in occupied Al-Quds and West Bank, even if the IOF's operation there continued. This comes after the Secretary General of the PIJ, Ziad al-Naqallah, and the accompanying delegation met with the head of the Egyptian General Intelligence Service, Minister Abbas Kamel, yesterday in the Egyptian capital. PIJ indicated in a statement yesterday that the two sides discussed bilateral relations and Egyptian efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people and ways to reunite the Palestinian ranks. Al-Mayadeen's sources revealed last week an upcoming visit by al-Naqallah to Cairo upon an Egyptian invitation. The delegation includes 5 members of the political bureau in Gaza and others from abroad, accompanied by the Secretary General, the sources stated. Based on the source's information, the delegation headed to Cairo to attend meetings with Egyptian officials to discuss escalations, especially those under the new Israeli government. And so apparently the new Israeli government that's just been voted in is led again by Netanyahu and is a bit more overtly right-wing and violent than past governments. So it has shown itself the past maybe month or so. Palestinian delegation from Gaza in Egypt to discuss restoring calm with Israel. And this is another from beforehand, but this is from the Egyptian perspective. This is ahram.org. Egypt will receive on Thursday a Palestinian delegation from the Gaza Strip led by prominent members of the Islamic Jihad movement. Official sources told Ahram Online. There's Ziad al-Naqallah once again. Other leaders from the Hamas movement will also join the delegation to attend an expanded meeting in Egypt. The sources say where the Egyptian officials will discuss the process to achieve calm between the Palestinian factions and Israel in light of the bloody escalation between the two sides, the sources explain. According to AFP, Islamic Jihad said earlier in the day that it would send a delegation led by the militant group's leader Ziad al-Naqallah to Cairo on Thursday at Egypt's invitation. The delegation would meet with the head of Egypt's intelligence service to discuss how to restore calm, especially after the last escalation, including the aggressions against prisoners, said Daoud Shab, a senior Islamic Jihad member in Gaza. The visit comes amid heightened Israeli-Palestinian tensions since the new far-right government and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came to power in late December. On Thursday, Israeli warplanes struck Gaza, drawing retaliatory rocket fire from Palestinian militants as violence flared, despite U.S. calls for urgent steps to restore calm, according to AFP. Israel said the pre-dawn strikes were in response to an earlier rocket launch, and it targeted military training camps. used by Gaza's rulers, Hamas. The airstrikes targeted the central area of the Strip, reported the AFP, hours after its interception of the missile fired from Gaza. Early on, Friday, Israeli jets launched strikes against Gaza, escalating tensions and fears a few months after Israel launched one of its deadliest raids in years in the occupied West Bank, including a deadly raid on Jenin refugee camp last Thursday, killing 10 Palestinians. An 11th Palestinian was killed elsewhere in the West Bank on the same day. In response, a Palestinian gunman opened fire outside an East Jerusalem synagogue on Friday night, killing at least 7 and wounding several people. This year, Israel's killed 35 Palestinians. That's before the last number. Last year was the deadliest year in the West Bank since the United Nations started tracking fatalities in 2005. Nearly 150 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank and East Jerusalem last year, making 2022 the deadliest year in those territories since 2004, according to a leading Israeli rights group. Thursday's visits comes 2 days after Egypt's chief of the General Intelligence Service, Abbas Kamel, and his Jordanian counterpart, Ahmed Hosni, conveyed a message of support. From their presidents, the message was from their presidents, for the Palestinian issue in meeting with President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. On Saturday, Egypt warned of the several dangers of the ongoing escalation between the Palestinian and Israeli sources, calling for the So we have that. Watch this space. We'll continue to consider how it is that Palestine, Egypt, and Palestine, as represented by the PIJ and Hamas, the democratically elected governments, we'll see how they continue to build relationships towards peace.
Good day. Not. Seymour Hersh, one of the greatest investigative journalists in the world, the man who exposed what happened at My Lai, a person with a long history of contacts within the US military and intelligence community, who's given us large numbers of exposés of all kinds of things that have been happening behind the scenes. Well, Seymour Hersh has published a gigantic article, you can find it on his Substack channel, in which he not only says that it was the United States that carried out the attack on the Nordstream pipelines, but he's provided a very detailed account, incredibly detailed account of how it was done. And Seymour Hersh says that the United States, the country that assisted the United States.
Yes, so Seymour Hersh, in a new article on his Substack, has implicated the United States in the Nordstream attack. We're going to take a look at a few journalistic takes on this. And we'll begin with Alexander Mercurius, and his vision of what has taken place.
States in carrying out this attack was Norway. And again, he's provided an enormous amount of detail as to how it was that the Norwegians went about helping the United States and the role they played. And, well, I'm going to provide a link. You can read it all there. It's absolutely fascinating. It reads at times like, I have to say, a thriller. It identifies, most importantly, the key US officials who came up with this plan, and before it also speaks about who were the operatives.
And as you can see, there's a bit of a lack of surety there. I think it should be noted that Seymour Hersh is known for his controversial, investigative, journalistic tactics, especially the use of anonymous sources. So Seymour Hersh, him implicating that the U.S. is involved in the Nordstream attacks, is not. It's not solid proof, but that doesn't mean that it's not true as well. So, again, we'll get a few more takes on it. Let's see that crooked mouth one more time.
I have to say, a thriller. It identifies, most importantly, the key US officials who came up with this plan, and before it also speaks about who were the operatives who did this plan themselves, and it turns out that they were not serving members of the US Special Forces, that they are members of the graduate school, or one of the graduate schools, and that the reason that these people who are, presumably in some kind of high-level training system, were used instead of serving members of the US Special Forces is in order that this attack, which the article says some US officials, some skeptical US officials, were worried could be construed as an act of war, that this attack could be carried out not by serving members of the US Armed Forces, but by these other people, so as to get round the obligation to keep Congress informed of operations of this nature. Now that's a pretty remarkable thing, and I have to say, if it's true.
Yeah, so I think that this was mentioned. Actually, it'll be mentioned in a take that we have on this. But again, and I think I mentioned it a couple of days ago, right? That the president's power is lessened when the U.S. and their decision to enter war is not regulated by the executive branch. So that comes up again, and what I think that makes a lot of sense.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence.
The whole notion of logic, the whole notion of logic.
Then I can imagine that if the Republicans ever do get into a position where they are in control of both the House, which of course they are in at the moment, but perhaps the Senate as well, either in 2024 or at some other time, well, they could actually bring some kind of congressional process about this, perhaps impeachment proceedings if President Biden, come to him in a moment, is still the president, or perhaps other things that might be other legal consequences from this. I mean, carrying out an operation of this nature in this covert way in order to bypass Congress, if Seymour Hersh is right? Well, that would seem to me extremely disturbing indeed. And I really do wonder about its legality. But the other thing that's most interesting about this is the identification of who it was in the team that apparently came up with this plan. And it was President Biden himself, Jake Sullivan, who was apparently the overall coordinator, if that's the right word. It doesn't seem as if the Defense Department was heavily involved. The CIA, unsurprisingly perhaps, Tony Blinken, and Victoria Nuland. And it turns out that, again, if you believe Seymour Hersh, that the planning for all of this, the go-ahead for all of this, began in autumn 2021, before the Russian intervention in Ukraine. So I have to say, if this is all true, it's an astonishing and really extraordinary expose. As I said, it has some very severe legal consequences if it does all turn out to be true. It shows that the United States was already contemplating action against German industrial infrastructure even before the war began. And I have to say, it does make me wonder whether the fact that all this planning began apparently several months before the war started, whether that's not another telltale sign that some of the people involved were expecting a war to start, perhaps because they were intent on provoking it. That's just a thought. But I think the most important point here is that the president himself, structure, even before the war began, all of this, the go-ahead for all of this began in autumn 2021, before the Russian intervention in Ukraine. So I have to say, if this is all true, it's an astonishing and really extraordinary expose. As I said, it has some very severe legal consequences if it does all turn out to be true. It shows that the United States was already contemplating action against German industrial infrastructure even before the war began. And I have to say, it does make me wonder whether the fact that all this planning began apparently several months before the war started, whether that's not another telltale sign that some of the people involved were expecting a war to start, perhaps because they were intent on provoking it. That's just a thought. But I think it shows.
Let's slow that down a bit.
Shows that the United States was already contemplating action against German industrial infrastructure even before the war began. And I have to say, it does make me wonder whether the fact that all this planning began apparently several months before the war started, whether that's not another telltale sign that some of the people involved were expecting a war to start, perhaps because they were intent on provoking it. That's just a thought. But I think the most important point here is that the president himself, Joe Biden, if Seymour Hersh is telling the truth, well, the president himself was deeply, intimately involved. Now, I have to say straight away that officially, this whole account by Seymour Hersh has been strongly denied by the administration. And Hersh himself provides in the articles some denials. He says that Adrian Watson, a White House spokesman, said in an email that the whole story is false and complete fiction. Tammy Scott, a spokesman for the Central Intelligence Agency, similarly wrote, "This claim is completely and utterly false." Well, that may be true, but please do bear in mind that given, as I said, the dubious legality, not just in terms of international law, I'm talking about domestic US law, of what apparently has been done here, if Seymour Hersh is telling the truth, then it's perhaps unsurprising that we're getting denials as opposed to confirmations. But these are strong denials, and I have to say it straight away, not everything that Seymour Hersh has reported has turned out to be true. But I would say also again that the level of detail in this report is so great that, despite what I have said many times before, that circumstantial detail doesn't always take us to the truth, doesn't always mean that something that's being reported is true. In this case, especially given Seymour Hersh's background, his extraordinary record of reporting factually true stories, and the care I know he uses with his sources, well, I have to say that I think, on balance, what Hersh is saying probably is true. Anyway, that now brings me to the next point, because of course it seems to me that when you read all of this, it's now absolutely clear that the President of the United States, President Biden, if you accept Seymour Hersh's account, is a committed hardliner. He's chosen his foreign policy team. He chose Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, Victoria Nuland. He got together apparently with them, came up with this plan, went ahead and carried out this plan, and it's absolutely clear that he played a central role in all the decision making.
We have the evidence.
The fact that he
the evidence, we heard the evidence, we saw the evidence,
is indeed the person who I think is driving all of these decisions is perhaps also confirmed by the State of the Union address. Now, that doesn't say very much about Ukraine. Actually, it's nearly all of it a long discussion of domestic programs, the president's domestic programs, but it does use that disastrous formula, at least I think it's a disastrous formula, that the United States will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. In other words, support Ukraine in what is in effect an open-ended war. And we see that...
Well, that is one of the benefits of not necessarily officially declaring war, that you may continue to engage in it endlessly.
The president himself finds it therefore very, very difficult to pull back from his policy. Now, if the president finds it difficult to pull back from his policies, and if remains so committed to this conflict in Ukraine, and if he's prepared to go to the extraordinary lengths that Seymour Hersh alleges, then it becomes very clear to me that he is the single biggest obstacle in the United States to any effort being made by the kind of people who are talking about a diplomatic settlement and who are behind the Rand Corporation report, the CSIS report, the IMF report, all of those reports. That he is, the president himself, is the big obstacle to putting all that into effect. Now, that means, possibly, that the entire future of this war, or at least of the US's commitment to this war, or to Ukraine, hangs on the continued occupancy of the White House by this president. Now, it may not be a coincidence that there's been an article apparently in the New York Times, I haven't seen it, which apparently says that President Biden is a great president, but that he should not stand again for a second term. There's all these investigations of the president that are now underway, and there's lots of reports now that the United States is indeed heading toward a big economic recession. And note that Seymour Hersh's article must have been written on the basis of very substantial leaks from within the establishment, the military security establishment of the United States. Otherwise, how did he get all this information? Especially, by the way, if it is true which suggests
We
that there
have
are
the
some people
evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We have the evidence. No, we have the evidence. No, we have the evidence. We have the evidence. We have the evidence. We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
who not only strongly disagree with what was done, but who are also keen to identify the role of the president in it, and note also that so far as I can see, the vice president, Kamala Harris, the person who would presumably step into the president's shoes, does not seem to have been directly involved or implicated in all this decision making. Well, I'm not going to make any predictions about President Biden's immediate prospects of remaining in the White House, but for what it's worth, I think it would be a big gamble to assume that he's going to be there for very much longer. The Russians, anyway, seem to be ready to fight this war, fight a long war. If he is gone, then it won't just be Ukraine that could find itself out on a limb, but the other hardliners, the Baltic states, Poland, and of course, coming back to what I said, Britain as well, unless they're a bit more careful. Anyway, that's me for...
So here's another take by Alexander Mercouris on The Last Lens with Danny Haifong. Consider these things. It actually, Seymour Hersh's article puts things into a historical context somewhat, but it is a biased one. And Alexander Mercouris does the same thing here. Let's see if his is any different. I'll compare.
Let's start about this. I mean, Germany still is a major industrial manufacturing power. The core of the German economy, the spine, if you like, of the German economy, but also a great deal of the self-conception of German society is based around manufacturing. Germany is a very cohesive society, very stable country, but that's largely because it's got this extremely modern, very efficient, very competitive industrial manufacturing base. Now, what makes the German manufacturing base competitive? Well, first of all, it's modern, it's sophisticated, it's advanced, it's all those things. We accept that. It's also got an advantage, a structural advantage, in that it's got a captive market within the Eurozone, and also the Euro is less strong than probably the Deutschmark would be. So that makes German goods cheaper on international markets. But there is one other key component. Now, Germany has committed itself to reducing its carbon footprint. I mean, remember, green politics, to all intents and purposes, started in Germany. And whatever your views about those, Germans have internalized these ideas to a degree that is probably greater than in any other country. So they moved away from coal, they moved away from oil, they moved away from nuclear power. They had to find some way of reducing their carbon footprint. They found that the alternative technologies weren't able to do that as quickly as perhaps they would have liked. So what they did was they went to Russia and they said, we want to buy gas. Gas has a much lower carbon footprint than other fossil fuels. It's cheap, it's very efficient, and of course the Russians have it in plentiful quantity. So over the last 40 plus years, Germany has been increasingly reorienting its energy around gas. Now, the other problem that then arose is that starting from the sort of mid-2000s, it became very clear that gas flowing to Germany across Ukrainian pipelines which had been built by the Soviet Union, by the way, was becoming unreliable because Ukraine was in the habit of siphoning off gas that was intended for Germany and was getting itself into repeated arguments with the Russians over gas prices, and this was sometimes leading to interruptions of gas from Russia to Germany. So the Germans, after this happened, started coming along to the Russians and said, look, let's cut out the transit states, the middle states, the states that these pipelines pass through. Let's build your gas pipelines directly to us in Germany across the Baltic Sea. And if you do that, we will get the gas directly. That will mean that we have cheap, competitive fuel at a low carbon footprint. Europe anyway is gradually switching to gas. Russia's the biggest producer of gas. It will make Germany the big energy hub in Europe, which is something which people have never quite understood, but it was an important factor. So it will strengthen our position within the European Union. And of course, by providing us with cheap energy, it will make our position, our industrial manufacturing base, more competitive. Of course, what that did as well was that it created a commonality of interest between Germany and Russia. And that was something that some countries, the United States, Poland, Britain, couldn't ever bring themselves to accept, because their nightmare, going all the way back to the Second World War, is that the Germans and the Russians will start to work together. They'll develop a commonality of economic interest that will work into a commonality of political interest, in which case that could, given power of each of these countries and the fact that each of them is, is a major European economic political power, taken together, they have an overwhelming power. That would, of course, if that were ever to happen, it would dominate Europe and would perhaps start to push the United States to the margins. I have always
It's said we create our own demons. In certain scatological cultures, the formulation of the concept of the anti-person or individual is created by the individual, wherein a bunch of countries get together after being rejected by countries and garner power between one another, and their only commonality being that they were pushed away by that other group.
The underlying cause of the Ukrainian crisis was this concern about the German-Russian relationship solidified by the Nordstream pipelines. So blowing up those pipelines breaks that relationship between Germany and Russia, or at least that's the idea. Getting a war there sets Germany against Russia, and the result is it puts the United States, Britain, Poland, to some extent France, Norway as well, all these countries, in a stronger position, not just in relation to Russia, but in relation to Germany as well. So it's got multiple levels of importance.
Yeah, and the myth that you hear from a lot of the mainstream media, which is that this was Putin's pipeline.
Yeah, so that was Alexander Muckrake, of a well-articulated take, albeit biased to a certain perspective. Here's another take, emphasized take on this. This is Russell Brand, the Russell Brand Show.
There's been a new article about the Nordstream pipeline leakages and who benefits from it. Allegations have been leveled by the US, Russia, Poland and other players in the region on who is behind the leak. Let's see if we can, like the greatest British detective in history, Sherlock Holmes, deduce who could have blown up that Nord Stream pipeline. Who had a motive? Who benefits? I understand that Russia get 45% of their annual treasury.
That would have been the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence. We have 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 the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard
case from Nord Stream 2. It was going to be extremely profitable because of the deals that they were going to do with Germany.
In a sense, Nord Stream 2 was their Avatar 2.
Right.
It was a sequel to their earlier pipeline, but it was still going to be highly profitable. So if Russia can't have blown up that pipeline because it not only was it financially necessary for them, it was also strategically necessary to maintain good relationships with Europe, who were getting their natural gas supplies from Russia, potentially for a considerable amount of time. Let's have a look at who else could have blown up that pipeline. Let's put together some clues. You up for this, Gal?
Yeah.
Play along at home. Let us know in the comments if you're over on YouTube or on Twitter who you think's blown up that pipeline. Let's have a look at our first piece of evidence. I call to the stand Joe Biden.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine.
We know what invasions are at this point in history.
Thanks for explaining that, Joe.
What do you mean invade? Oh, you know, tanks, armies and that.
Trains, things like that.
We did say trains.
We did at one point.
Trains. That's not going to happen. That's an unreliable method. What if there's no tracks?
Again, then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
We will bring an end.
That for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
We will bring an end to it.
That's not going to happen. That's an unreliable method. What if there's no tracks?
Again, then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
We will bring an end to Nord Stream 2. I'm going to put that in my pad.
What did he mean by that? What did he mean?
What does he mean? Don't jump to conclusions unless you're a conspiracy theorist.
Like Seymour Hersh.
Seymour Hersh, one of the great Pulitzer Prize-winning conspiracy theorists. One of his conspiracy theories is that Abu Ghraib were torturing prisoners during the Iraq War. Another of his conspiracy theories is that civilians were killed during Vietnam, for which I believe that reporting was what won him that conspiracy theorist gong, the Pulitzer Prize.
They are going to have to start renaming that. First Chris Hedges, now Seymour Hersh.
Conspiracy theorist, Greenwald, conspiracy theorist.
Blimey. Greenwald, yeah.
They're all,
wow.
They're all Pulitzer Prize-winning conspiracy theorists. Okay, but so Joe Biden there, you saw that, didn't you? You heard it. We're not sharing in a mass delusion induced by a globalist system that wants us all dumb and distracted, are we? Hypnotized by centralist interest. We all heard Joe Biden say we will end that Nord Stream pipeline. But that's not motive enough, or it's certainly not evidence enough. Let's see if way back in 2014, secretaries of state were talking about the energy relationships between the United States and Europe and potential competition with Russia. Have a look.
You want to depend more on the North American energy platform, the tremendous bounty of oil and gas that we're finding in North America. You want to have pipelines that don't go through Ukraine and Russia. For years, we've tried to get the Europeans to be interested in different pipeline routes.
Different pipeline routes. Now, these are all interesting pieces of evidence. That's evidence that America had an imperative to
no one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Relationships between Europe and the States when it comes to the purchase of national energy. Joe Biden said that he will end the Nord Stream pipeline too, particularly in the event of war. But we've saved the best of the investigative journalists to last, a man who's not yet won a Pulitzer Prize, but surely if these conspiracy theories keep flowing, it's only a matter of time. This is from my interview with former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink, where I asked him outright, Is it possible to blow up a pipeline under the water if you're a Navy SEAL? Have a look. One of the things they said around the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is it wouldn't be possible that, like, America don't have the submersive capacity. In the Baltic Sea, at a level of 200 feet, purely hypothetically, would it be possible for a Special Forces team to undertake the sabotage of a pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, seemed almost offended by the question.
Of course he did. Jocko Willink, that great big testosterone comet, that great blazing mighty meteorite of testosterone, was offended by the question. Here is the article that's provoked this interest by Seymour Hersh. Last June, the Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicised midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Okay, what's next? Biden and Nuland's indiscretion, if that's what it was. And that's, of course, a reference to both that Victoria Nuland, who's been in successive administrations, isn't she, mate? She says, oh, well, we'd do it, we'd blow it up. There's a real cool story behind this, isn't there? Would you explain it?
Which one's this one, mate?
Well, like, if they publicly say, if Biden publicly says,
I see what you mean.
We're going to blow up that pipeline, they don't have to go via Congress for a covert operation.
That's right, yeah.
That's mental, isn't it? So it wasn't a mistake for Biden to go, yeah, we'll blow it up, and for Victoria Nuland to say, yeah, well, we'll end that pipeline, we'll kick them right up the pipeline. By doing that, that means that it has to be secret to a degree that it don't even have to get congressional support, which it normally would if it was a co-op, isn't it?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And so there's another workaround for congressional support. You know, what are the ways that a government can circumvent the checks and balances of said government? A part of a government can circumvent the checks and balances of the entire government or other parts of the government. An easy way to do that is to employ a rule, especially in this case, related to whether or not something is secure or secret, top secret. Exposing it then makes it less regulated as top secret, and then the rules that apply to top secretness won't apply to it, and it can be manipulated in the fashion that that person sees fit.
Yes, correct.
Covert operation. Listen, we're only going to be, if you're watching us on Twitter or YouTube, we can only stay with you for another minute because we're going to do our hero presentation. Here's the news, no, here's the effing news. And in that, we dive pretty deep into Ukrainian corruption. It's the whole thing.
Right.
He's like, he's duping us.
Right.
He's like a hustler. He's like a pool hustler. He's pretending to be all like that. And then he gets home and he goes, now listen to me, son. Hunter, go take another laptop to Delaware. Like, and it's all, the whole thing's a master plan. The plan to blow up Nord Stream 2 and 1 was suddenly downgraded from a covert requiring that Congress be informed to one that was deemed as highly classified with US military support. Under the law, the source explained, is no longer a legal requirement to report to Congress. What's the next bit of information? The next bit is this. Yeah. Is this the bit about, this bit I really like, because this contextualizes the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline as advantageous not only economically, but strategically. Because if you think about this rationally for a moment, Russia is like a serious country with a real history, hundreds of millions of people. Europe and Russia have got to have a convivial, congenial relationship, whether that's based on trade, military pacts, or whatever. For all of us, for them, for us, peace has to be brought about. But the whole Nord Stream pipe stream scheme allows a number of advantages. Firstly, it's what we would call in British football a six-pointer. Money that Russia loses, revenue that Russia loses, America gains. That's fantastic. Also, it creates military disruption. Listen to this. The Nord Stream 2, whose construction was completed in September 2021, would, if approved by German regulators, double the amount of cheap gas that would be available to Germany and Western Europe. The second pipeline would also provide enough gas for more than 50% of Germany's annual consumption. As long as Europe remained dependent on the pipelines for cheap natural gas, Washington was afraid that countries like Germany would be reluctant to supply Ukraine with the money and weapons it needed to defeat Russia.
Twin agenda, really, isn't it?
You can quantify this. These are facts. They're numbers. These are facts. 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 They're numbers. You can quantify this.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
twin agenda. It's a twin agenda.
And I think also the United States, I think, was recently announced they have become the biggest suppliers or exporters of liquid natural gas now. So
certainly to the UK.
It has worked.
As a strategy, it's been brilliant. As a display of moral and ethical diplomacy, it's not been great, particularly when the whole framing of this, remember, is Russia as aggressor and Ukrainian civilians and their protection and safety as the aim and the goal. But throughout history, how many times have you seen a humanitarian disaster or crisis of some kind presented to you as something that necessarily had to be dealt with only for some of the most powerful interests in the world to benefit? So I think we have to learn to look for that template, not to become cynical and bankrupt or extremist, and certainly not to become conspiracy theorists, but we have to certainly stay aware of that possibility, to stay awake to that potential. Okay, if you're watching this on
Yep, and this is a red alert warning. Red alert warning. This is Real Coffee with Scott Adams.
All right, so let's keep our mind open on this Project Veritas. I don't know what's going on there. All right, remember when I told you that when we heard that there was a story that the Nordstream pipeline was blown up by Americans? Do you remember I told you, I'm not so sure about this story? Do you remember my skepticism at the initial reporting? Well, so apparently there's this one American journalist, Seymour Hersh, who's the one who believes he has this inside information that U.S. divers planted their explosives, during a NATO exercise, blah, blah, blah. And then I see Mike Lee, senator from Utah, say, he tweeted, I'm troubled that I can't immediately rule out that the suggestion that the U.S. that the U.S. blew up Nord Stream. I checked with a bunch of Senate colleagues. Among those I've asked, none were ever briefed on this. If it turns out to be true, we've got a huge problem. So now
these are not confirmed sources. This entire story is speculation. And it's launched on a Thursday night, on a Thursday early in the day, or maybe a Wednesday night, so that it goes into the weekend, and the other atrocities that are happening earlier in the week and are forgotten about into the week. This is not a story void of speculation.
We've got a problem. If it's true, Congress should have been part of the decision making, or at least they should know about it now.
And this is the consistency in this story. Of course, we have this concept of journalistic integrity that we're focusing on, but also the idea, and in a sense, the journalistic integrity should cover that. But the idea that these wars are being engaged in without congressional approval.
And apparently they don't. Apparently they don't. So I saw in the comments, is Seymour Hersh reliable? Is there any history of any big stories he's gotten wrong? He's the My Lai massacre guy? He goes back that far, huh? Long history of good stories. So maybe. But what do you suppose his source was, or sources? Because don't you think his sources were military spooks? See, here's my problem. If there was a real way that the thing was blown up, and our military didn't want anybody to know the real way, wouldn't they leak a story about sort of a traditional way? So here's what I'm suspecting. I'm wondering if maybe we blew it in the comments. Is Seymour Hersh reliable? Is there any history of any big stories he's gotten wrong? He's the My Lai massacre guy? He goes back that far, huh? Long history of good stories. So maybe. But what do you suppose his source was, or sources? Because don't you think his sources were military spooks? See, here's my problem. If the sources were military spooks or sources, because don't you think his sources were military spooks? See, here's my problem. If there was a real way that the thing was blown up and our military didn't want anybody to know the real way, wouldn't they leak a story about sort of a traditional way? So here's what I'm suspecting. I'm wondering if maybe we blew it up with some, let's say we had a submarine that could do that, or some other kind of asset that was not divers with bombs. We might want to put out the story that yes, we did it, it was us, but we'd fool them about what technology we use because maybe that's a secret. That's a possibility. So that would be one reason to plant a false story so that the other side doesn't know what kind of assets you have. Maybe, underwater drone. Yeah, maybe we have submarine drones and we don't want anybody to know about it. The other possibility is that we're sending some kind of a message. Let's say it was an intentional leak or something like that. Do you think it would be a message to Putin to make sure that he knows how serious NATO is? Because if you're Putin and you imagined it blew up, I don't know, on its own or something, that doesn't really show you that the other side is serious about this war. But at some point, maybe you want to tell Russia, oh yeah, we did this, and we would do things like this again. I don't know. Maybe it's a way to show how serious we are. Message to the Germans, yeah. Now, do you remember when the Nordstream first blew up, and the U.S. said it was Russia blowing up its own pipeline? Do you remember my reaction to that? About Russia blowing up its own pipeline? I called bullshit to that on the first minute. I think Tucker Carlson did as well. I think other people did as well. But as soon as I heard that Russia
are glaringly obvious
blew up its own pipeline, that wasn't even slightly believable. There wasn't a single thing about that was in the same zip code of something you should believe. It was just ridiculously unbelievable. It was the opposite of all common sense. And sure enough, exactly like you thought, it was a lie. All right, I'm very curious about Matt Gaetz and his take on Ukraine. So he's pretty much stopped.
Yeah, so there we have it. That's Scott Adams. Scott Adams with the real coffee. And here we have Sticks and Hammer 666. Lots of cuz and s's.
Alright everyone, we start off today with a very interesting article here. Link in the description, archived of course. It's to a Substack by Seymour Hersh actually. You may have heard that name before if you know anything about the history of journalism in the United States. Hersh was the one that broke the My Lai massacre way back during the Vietnam War. He's also covered a bunch of other stuff. Some of it's been corroborated, some of it's called conspiracy theories. You'll note that the newer it is, the more likely journalism is likely to be called a conspiracy theory. There's a reason for that, because if you disclose something 50 years later, normally it doesn't matter. Just look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident. All the people that talked about how that was a false flag were considered conspiracy theorists till a few years ago. Now, conspiracy theory, there's a reason it's called conspiracy theories. You'll note that the newer it is, the more likely journalism is likely to be called a conspiracy theory. There's a reason for that, because if you disclose something 50 years later, normally it doesn't matter. Just look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident. All the people that talked about how that was a false flag were considered conspiracy theorists till a few years ago. Now we know that all of those conspiracy theories basically were true. So when Seymour Hersh comes out and makes the claim that the CIA did the Nordstream bombing, well, he's relying upon an anonymous source, so someone familiar with the matter, and we do have to be careful, therefore, in trusting it, regardless of the plausibility of the scenario. I would like to point out that people preemptively calling it a conspiracy theory, that would never happen. You don't know that. You do have a claim that this explains what occurred. That's even based on an anonymous source, at the very least, better than not knowing at all, because I've seen similar...
we can't say that this is not rooted in the fake news, both sides take on news and journalism, right? So you know, there's an understanding, and that may not necessarily be true. You know, there's we could call it a belief, you know, about journalistic integrity. That's not a positive one. That is not in support of journalism, that could be the root of people like Seymour Hersh being questioned. I mean, not only his history of having controversial sources, but in today's age, if you think about it from a contemporary perspective, that could be another reason why it's easy for anyone, including a government, to dismiss a news story. So Tim Pool and Seymour Hersh are victims in the same way that they're not. You know, they can definitely be influenced, or they can be discredited, let's say, by these things.
Claims without evidence that the Russians bombed their own pipeline, and a lot of you bought it hook, line, and sinker. I recall at the time in my own analysis saying that probably was horseshit, because it didn't really make sense. If you have a pipeline that's feeding a significant proportion of your potential enemy's energy, why, when you can use it for leverage because you can turn it off at any time you want to on your end via Gazprom, why would you bomb it and then remove that bit of leverage unless you intend to go insane?
The whole notion of logic.
In the wake of that, Russia hasn't gone insane. It's basically acting the same way that it has been the whole time. So I call shenanigans on the Russians being the ones that did it. There's no evidence of it. That claim was made right up front like a goddamn legacy media tidal wave, and there wasn't even an anonymous source there. There was just speculation and some hype. Then, you've got this claim. It is plausible. The United States would be near the top of the list of nations that would want to destroy Nordstream. Another big one would be the Germans or perhaps the British. It would make sense. But does that prove the point? No, it doesn't prove it. It's still just a claim. A plausible one that fits the evidence insofar as we can gather what little we have. Of course, the Germans already investigated and found no specific evidence.
No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence. We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence. We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Evidence of who done it, including the Russians again at the time. The legacy media didn't cover that one as much as the initial story when it blew up in the first place. The basic claim that
no one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
That Seymour Hersh is making is that according to the source, the United States had already planted remote explosives on the pipeline sometime prior to it being blown. They did this under the cover of the Baltic Ops. That was a war game that occurred, of course, a few months beforehand. And the idea was that the war games, well, it probably wasn't all meant as a cover. It is a legit military exercise for training. They said, well, as long as we're in that area, you know, Nordstream's right below it, we can have one of those ships put down a couple of divers, cover it as a training exercise. You know, the Russians are nowhere around. They're not going to really know what the fuck is going on. send in a dive team or send in a submersible of some sort. You plant the explosives, and then later on we detonate them. Once we're out of the area, out of the blast zone, of course. Again, plausible. There's no proof of this. I will say this, though. Much like there's hypocrisy over people who believed the initial story that the U.S. put out, re Nordstream, and then ignore things counter to that, just because you presume that the original story was false, and trust me, I do, does not necessarily mean that this particular claim is the actual smoking gun. Again, you only have one source. Hersh is generally a respected journalist, has been wrong before, and is called a conspiracy theorist, again, mainly related to things that are new, which is not a coincidence, but overall has been respected. Hell, he worked with the legacy media for the most part there. He was working for the New York Times, I think, back in the 1980s. So shouldn't the legacy media take him seriously? Oh no, he's got a Substack now, so he went rogue, so we don't need to discuss this evil conspiracy theory. That's what I speculate will happen. The White House immediately came out, in the CIA too, and said this is horseshit. None of this is true. It would never happen. Well, that's just your opinion, man. Yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to admit that they got caught bombing the Nord Stream pipeline, theoretically an act of war against the Russians. If the United States or any NATO country was involved, they're not going to admit to it. You're going to cover it up, possibly with a military training exercise, muddy the waters a little bit. Nobody's going to find evidence of it. How the hell are they supposed to find evidence of who put an explosive on the side of the pipeline? They're never going to be able to do so. So whatever party is guilty has that cover. That would be true even if it had been the Russians. Putin just went stark raving mad one day and ordered the pipeline to be destroyed. Because for reasons, unknown reasons. He wanted to cut off his nose to spite his face, just to show that he's the strong man of Eastern Europe or some shit like that. Again, never made much sense to me. I do like the conspiracy theory angle of this, though. I like it when something is dismissed out of hand. They're shooting the messenger first by saying, well, Seymour Hersh has done other conspiracy theory stuff, like he claimed that the Osama raid didn't go as it was officially listed. Well, I've never seen a picture of Osama's mangled corpse now, have you? He was also one of the people that broke the Abu Ghraib story back during the Iraq War era. You remember that one? The torture scandal at Abu Ghraib that blew up in the nation's face and crippled the W administration? Yeah, that was Seymour Hersh too. That was corroborated. That became one of the greatest national scandals. It's probably second only to the My Lai massacre in his corpus of work. There are other claims, something involving JFK and other things that he's done throughout time. Again, the big problem is that when you work with an anonymous source, even if you know the source to be credible, the public can't necessarily gather that. But dismissing it out of hand when there is no specific countervailing evidence, and there's not, is also equally inappropriate. I remain with an open mind to everything other than the claim that Putin was just having a bad day and that he was the one that ordered the Nord Stream pipeline to be destroyed. I think there's a very low probability of that having happened. The CIA and USA, it's possible, but this doesn't prove that. We still also have to keep an open mind towards the possibility that the Germans who immediately investigated it did it themselves. It could have been the Swedes. It could easily have been the British. It's well within their technological capabilities. And it could have been Ukrainians or people loyal to them, people partnered with them. It would be really funny if it were actually eco-terrorists or something like that. I find out Greenpeace bombed the Nord Stream pipeline or something like that. Wouldn't that be... Seymour Hersh would be wishing he was the one that broke that story if that were true. I don't think so. I think this and a few other explanations sort of compete with having...
Yes, I don't think so either. I think that was total speculation and maybe even conjecture.
Some degree of evidence behind them. It's interesting that the mainline narrative never did, though. Yet this is the conspiracy theory. So I don't know that the CIA blew up Nord Stream, but it's an intriguing theory, and from a source that is generally reliable, although the original source that he's deriving it from really is in the same category as an unnamed official says. Within an administration or something. You're never quite sure whether it's true. Then you just have to default to looking at the plausibility of the narrative that story tells. I would rate this as highly plausible. That's about all.
Yeah, and so journalism is not secondary or tertiary here at TR. It is of the utmost importance. Make sure you join that journey towards a better tomorrow with us. Your engagement through a like, a share, subscribe, it can help to continue our mission to journalistically go where no news vlog has gone before. Make it so.
Today's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
Muckrake is the segment, and Tim Pool, by way of Revenge of the Cis, is the focus. Tim Pool's under fire for his journalistic practices, if they exist. This is from a Revenge of the Cis episode entitled Beanie Journalism.
Cashman.
Douglas? Oh.
Cashman. The crack journalist for Beanie Siegel over there, Tim
The
Cass.
Gonzo journalist.
Yeah.
Gonzo, yeah.
So is Beanie Siegel...
After this fucking little gay essay he's writing, he's going to be a dunzo journalist.
Yeah.
Hey, Mersh, remember that time that Hunter S. Thompson stayed at the topic of his article's parents' house in their guest?
I'm sure he probably did, but even on top of that, he would still be interesting.
So just before we see if this article is going to be
Mersh, are you saying by way of relationship in that analogy that Tim Pool is interesting? Is that what's happening here? I'm not sure.
Objective. This is just a reminder. This is the guy who was writing the article.
His work will end up being Warhol-esque in a way where it's...
But thank you.
I'm serious.
What would be Warhol-esque?
No, thank you.
I don't know how else to articulate it, but I think you're really gifted and very talented, and I'm grateful.
No, we've been talking about this is what this is their entire economy.
Yeah.
This is why, and if you check out Marsh on Twitter, I finally get to take advantage of the old 4,000 character tweet thing, and basically explain Tim's whole little circle. They make a bunch of money and they freeze every other creator out, as has been proven with, as much as I hate boring Jeremy, Tim's whole thing with the quartering just proves that
The guy from Daily Wire?
No, that's Jeremy Boring.
Oh, okay.
Boring Jeremy from the quartering.
Got it.
But Tim's treatment...
It's confusing because they're both boring.
Tim's treatment of both Venti and the quartering, of freezing them out because they're not part of the club and they don't want to make that sweet, sweet money. So there's these little cliques, and it's a pyramid, dude. So Tim's freezing out quartering of Brittany Venti. People like Brittany Venti and the quartering will freeze people like us out because everyone wants to sort of be the top dog. Tim's entire clique, besides the money, their only other currency is niceties. The only thing you have to do to stay cool in their little clique is lie for them, and then just constantly say fake nice shit. Man, Tim, that song is brilliant. Dude, this guy...
And this is, I can't say this is not like internet drama, but the quartering is another self-proclaimed journalistic outfit whose journalistic integrity can be debated.
Guy, he's a regular Warhol. He's so brilliant. That literally is all you have to do is just show up, fillet, and be nice and never expose anybody, and they'll let you earn a little. They'll let you have some crumbs off the table. It's disgusting. I'm so sick of Tim Pool.
Yeah, we're going to do a thing.
Yeah, it's gonna be
you know
awesome.
what I think would be really cool, and I know you're trying to end the show, but I've had this vision a little bit of you coming out to the farm and really seeing what my day-to-day life is like.
So this was already planned out for him coming out to the farm, but it's a big house, not a farm. But going out to the farm, this was already planned out in advance before the whole thing. Go out of the farm, and that's
the goal.
It's totally different than this glam version.
Yeah, that's the
glam. Oh, That's right. At the farm, she's out there with buckets in her hand, milking cows.
She keeps saying this like farm
lifting
thing.
hay barrels over her back.
She even said like, she even was like, I make $15 an hour and I drive my dad's farm truck. And I was like, I bet her dad's farm truck is one of those like Dodge Ram double cab, probably like, you know what I mean? That's probably 2 years old and has like, it's probably fully loaded. It's probably not a farm truck.
Yeah.
Goal.
It
That's
is a
I love
farm
doing
'cause
stories like
she's
that.
full
Ricky.
of so much bullshit.
It's one of those trucks. It's one of those trucks the construction company owner buys for himself, but he's not going to be caught dead hauling buckets of paint in it and shit. You know, it's just going to put his logo for his company on it.
So this whole thing was set up beforehand. But anyway, this is the stuff that had come out today. Apparently, this is after Eliza's first appearance on Timcast. The video is very poor quality. So let's see. Let's see if maybe we could pinpoint the friendliness and pinpoint why Tim doesn't like talking about e-thoughts and e-drama, which he does all the time, by the way.
Not only Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Why not only Tim doesn't like talking about it?
Oh, why nobody wants to talk about it?
Hey, you know what? I'm in the middle of a story right now.
Adam, I owe you too much.
Oh, I get it.
I want my apology, Adam.
I get it now. This makes a lot more sense, honestly.
I want my apology,
Adam.
Send someone out.
Hey.
Oh boy!
Wow, they're really friendly, him and Ian.
Can I cue the bum 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 bum?
No way, huh?
This looks inappropriate. This looks like, you know what? Dare I say, Royce, a conflict of interest.
Samurai Cicada said Royce said he would block people who were following Tim Pool back then.
No, I said that.
That wasn't me. I never said that.
I said that.
I didn't care enough about Twitter to bother logging in and unfollowing, but Royce kept this. I didn't block anybody. I haven't blocked anybody on Twitter.
No, and I never said I'd block. I said at one point, because Tim's always having stupid dog shit takes, and he's always grifting. I said something to the effect of, I'm going to start unfollowing everybody I see
yeah,
retweeting
I remember
and
you saying.
following
I didn't
Tim
say
Pool.
that, and I didn't block. I haven't blocked anybody.
Yeah. Who's that? Is that fucking Chad Zumock?
That's Chad Zumock. Yeah,
So,
he's safe.
Only person that confuses us.
Samurai Cicadas a dirty club.
The bag.
No, man, I was. If you're blocked, let me know. I'll unblock you. But I haven't blocked anybody on purpose anyway.
Yes. Yes, it is Ian Crossland. Wait, why are you hiding now?
Yeah, no,
hiding
it's a
because
little
she's-
group.
She's hiding because she's kind of almost a better grifter than you guys, and she knows how to create
yep.
some deniability.
Eliza?
See, the problem is you got to assign a guy like me to a case like this, because even if I do end up fucking the chick, I will still throw her in front of a bus. I'll still write a totally honest, brutal article.
Look, yeah, no, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Hey, let me tell you something. I'm not going to make any accusations because I know these people are very litigious. But what I do know is, in my experience, people that have body language like that are about to or have had some sort of sex.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I'm not saying that they did in any way. I'm just saying I know a lot. That is a telltale sign.
How would anyone feel if it was your wife and it was one of your buddies do it, like acting like that, right? Like, that's all you got to ask yourself.
Yeah, I get it, though. I get it, though. The idea that it's about integrity. It's like, okay, so you have this stance about the ways that Eliza Blue is being portrayed, and you hang out with her, and at that moment or in that moment when you're with her, are you contradicting that? Are you in some way showing inconsistencies in how you align with all of that? Because you're going to have to interview her later, and that integrity has to be there. So is that integrity in question now?
Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
How would you feel? You walk in a room and your wife's sitting there like rolling around on the couch. You'd be like, "Oh, what are we doing here?"
Why are there two of them that look exactly the same in here?
What? Is that your foot?
Oh my God!
Whoa, come on, man. I didn't know the video was even this spicy.
Oh, no. It gets spicy.
Your foot on his thigh?
All of these people, the difference between us and them, and I like to think, is like, we're pieces of shit all the time, and you can see how we are on air, off air. That's pretty much us. That's
and then
us.
we're ironically the arbiters of truth.
Right. We're pieces of shit. The fucking turkey's mad at us for playing Tetris music while buildings fell.
That was fun.
And they were tweeting us today, and they go, "These guys are people are dying." We get bitch out all the time, but it's like, so we're shit, and we're not pretending to be smarter. We're not trying to save anybody. And the intro, by the way, we're joking around. We're not saving any Western civilization. The whole fucking joke is that we're just assholes telling stupid jokes about stuff that we want to talk about. These people really think, like, you heard Tim go, we have congressmen coming on, and was Boebert, by the way. She was on yesterday.
Yeah, she was on with Gates, Boebert, and some other fucking...
Right, yeah, whatever.
Still wore the same outfit.
Right. So, again...
Yeah, we did cover that yesterday. You can go back and see the piece on Matt Gaetz. It's a short piece because Boebert was interviewed for a majority of the interview. Also, there's another new congresswoman whose name escapes me now, but she also voted against McCarthy at the beginning of the hearings on his on his election. So she's definitely a far right, a new far right congresswoman as well. But Boebert was there, and Boebert, she said a lot of things that I've heard before, you know. But Matt Gaetz had some ideas about populism that I think were really pertinent to contextualizing the relationship between the left and its spectrum and the right and its spectrum. So please go back and check that out.
You guys are all these weird groupie pieces of shit behind the scene, and then when you ask why you can't, you could be this if you want. You could be just a fucking dumb idiot, but you know what you're not going to have?
Are glaringly obvious. Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
Hersh and I aren't going to fucking go out there and go, you know what? We're sending a crack team of journalists to take a... We're not going to do that. We don't care.
I don't have to. I just look at you and go, you're fucking lying.
Yeah.
That story has holes.
So, like,
your inconsistencies
fuck this, man.
Are glaringly obvious.
Of course the story's not going to be true. It's all bullshit. And again, I want to be clear. I wouldn't have even cared this much if people weren't getting kicked off of Twitter for it.
And that's the thing, man. Just be an open book, like us. You know what I mean? Make things a non-issue. I mean, it's, you know, shit. I've had people coming at me for 3 years, and everything they have is just shit that's come straight from the horse's fucking mouth. There's never been a fucking revelation about any of us. You know what I mean? Just be who you are. Embrace it. And then that way, if something does come out people didn't know, you go, well, yeah, but that fits my character. What do you want?
But honestly, not even that. Even if Ian would have said, like, look, honestly, like, I don't really want to pass any judgment here because we're friends, we hang out, so I don't think I'm going to be objective here. And that's it. That people would have been like, okay, hey, you know what? Fair game. Nobody would be mad. But the fact that you're trying to pretend like you could hang out, do mushrooms, smoke fucking weed, play guitar, get hammered, put your foot on people's dicks, and then be like, no, hey, this story's going to be on the up and up. Tim, I get it, bud. I wouldn't want to fucking have to talk about this either if I were you. I get it. And now he's trying to do the irony bro stuff on Twitter. You seen Tim doing the irony bro stuff on Twitter? Doing the whole, yeah, it's actually good. It's fine. Oh, I'm not trending again. Eliza Blue's
I'll
awesome.
say something controversial again. Yeah. I would say this though, Royce. The only thing I'll correct you on is you're like, I wouldn't want to talk about it either. No, you're wrong because the way we are, we would be wired to talk about it.
No. What I meant was if I was Tim Pool.
Oh, but I'm saying the way we are. Yeah. If like this whole thing blew up and some grifter was on our show that we had as a guest, and then one of us was banging him.
Right.
We would just lean right into it right away and be like, all right, look, I was fucking this chick. I don't know what the fuck was going on, whatever. But like, if this shit surfaced, we would just pull whoever was fucking her on the air and be like, so what's up, man? You were banging her? Like, come on, come clean, you piece of shit. Come on, tell us what's going on. That's all.
All right, let's see. Okay, so this is the next one in this series.
That's not my priority.
Okay. Hey. Okay.
Look, we got some dancers in the back.
Yo, you was straight smashing that.
There, and we think.
Smash.
We
You know what?
think.
Good for you, Ian. Good for you.
All right, we got the strippers in the back.
Wow.
That's, dude, she was a victim
She
of
was a
trafficking.
victim of sex trafficking,
and honestly,
man.
a triggering statement like that could really send her could send her into a tailspin. It's not funny, man.
Yeah.
Ian.
Be like, no, hey, this fun Twitter. You seen Tim doing the iron?
Like this whole thing blew up and some grifter was on our show that we had his. If this shit surfaced, we would just pull whoever was fucking her on the air and be like, so what's.
All right, let's see.
Yo, you was straight smashing that.
There, and we think.
Smash.
We
You know what?
think.
Good for you, Ian. Good for you.
All right, we got the strippers in the back.
Wow. That's, dude, she was a victim
She
of
was a
trafficking.
victim of sex trafficking,
and honestly,
man.
a triggering statement like that.
Yo, you was straight.
If this shit surfaced, we would just pull whoever was fucking her on the air and be like, so what's up, man? You were banging her? Like, come on. Come clean, you piece of shit. Come on, tell us what's going on. That's all.
All right, let's see. Okay, so this is the next one in this series.
That's not my priority.
Okay. Hey. Okay.
Look, we got some dancers in the back.
Yo, you was straight smashing
There, and we think.
Smash.
We think.
Good for you, Ian. Good for you.
All right, we got the strippers in the back.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, look, yeah, exactly. I'm not all right with that, I guess. I wouldn't. I mean, in the same breath, I wouldn't be in the position or the predicament that these people are in. But I also, if I was in that predicament, I wouldn't go further and call the person who has been a victim of sex trafficking, or at least she claims that she is and has been. I wouldn't call her a stripper. I wouldn't do that.
Dude,
she might even reach. I think she reacted and said "wow" there. So
she was a victim of
She was a
trafficking.
victim of sex.
If this shit surfaced, we would just pull whoever was fucking her on the air and be like, so what's up, man? You were banging her? Like, come on, come clean, you piece of shit. Come on, tell us what's going on. That's all.
All right, let's see. Okay, so this is the next one in the series.
That's not my priority.
Hey. Okay.
Look, we got some dancers in the back.
Yo, you was straight smashing
There,
that.
and we think.
Smash.
We
You know
think.
Good for you, Ian. Good for you.
All right, we got the strippers in the back.
Wow.
That's, dude, she was a victim
She
of
was a
trafficking.
victim of sex trafficking,
and honestly,
man.
a triggering statement like that could really send her, could send her into a tailspin. It's not funny, man.
Wait, hold on.
They already got rid of their socks.
Never watched.
I never had socks.
Never watched a double date on here.
So it is a double date. So they were. No one corrected them. So my assumption is that she had some sort of physical, maybe not dating, but they could have fucked. And makes all of this entire story. No wonder Tim didn't stand up for not censoring people like he normally does. No wonder he pushed this aside.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Could Eliza Blue potentially be the Kalila Kuhn of the alt grift right? Could she just be a wrecking ball that comes in and undoes this whole fucking thing by just being a shameless whore piece of shit? It's always pussy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hold on.
How long has the story of Helen of Troy been around?
Yo, what?
Thousands of years?
At least 20, 30 years.
At least. At least 1964.
At least.
But like, they wrote a cautionary Greek tragedy how long ago?
Very long ago.
And it's like, how many people read it? It's not even. It's a Lex Friedman level story that everyone knows, and motherfuckers still just getting undone by some pussy every time. It's always some
Obedience says,
pussy.
unlike Kalila, Eliza actually cast a wider net, so it might be even worse with Eliza. That
Why do you always have me? I got you.
Liv! Who are you talking to right now?
Liv, where's Liv? Oh man, it's still here.
And again, I want to point this out. This is the thing that again, and we talked about this too. You can't just hang out without a camera on. You can't just have just chill, have some beers, hang out, like play the guitar, like normal people do.
You know the answer to that question.
No, they
How many
can't.
people have we hung around?
I know.
In every city in this country, anytime we meet up with streamers, there's a very short list of streamers who know how to just hang out, right?
Yeah.
Like Dick Masterson's one of them, Ricada's one of them, Carl from Who Are These Podcasts is one of them. There are very few people who are, Christy and Frank, I'll give them credit, because once the show was over, they hung out, but they just hung out. There was no like, guys, let's go on Instagram! Like, eating slop with these fucking pieces of shit. Eating horse slop with these fucking horses. No, but it's like, there was just, all right, show's over. That was a great show. We have fun. Hey, let's go get some beers. Let's go get a bite to eat. And there's none of that, like, guys, I'm going to go live. We're going to go live. It's like, all right, man, like, you're making millions of dollars. Just play your guitar and eat your mushrooms and just hang out.
Oh, by the way, Cicada, I unblocked you. Check to see if your people are blocked that you don't know. Twitter's been really weird for you too, right? Like it's been fucking off.
Yeah, so there we have it, and remember to watch this space because we'll definitely come back to it.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
Sneako joined Muhammad Hijab on his podcast, episode number 14. And they discussed censorship, red pilling, and Islam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? And welcome to another episode of the MH podcast. Very irregular podcast, but an exciting one nonetheless. And we've got a very exciting
guest, Sneako, a very notorious, prolific YouTuber, who unfortunately has been deplatformed. An individual who's actually been mentioned, to my knowledge, in the Senate in the United States of America, because of this issue of censorship. I think it's a good place for us to start, Sneako. What exactly happened? Did you break any community guidelines such that YouTube could decide to take you off the platform?
Yeah, I would like to call myself a former YouTuber, now Rumbler. And I guess I did break community guidelines, but there's very specific guidelines, and there's a specific narrative that they try to push with what you're allowed to talk about and what you're not allowed to talk about. I don't want to get you a strike if I talk about these certain issues, but it relates to Big Pharma and Pfizer and the election misinformation, cyberbullying, just random political issues that they want you to have a specific idea about, and if you don't believe what they want you to believe.
Sorry to cut you off. Were you given a strike and then a second strike and a third strike, or was it just one go?
It was 3 strikes, but the last 2 came in the same week, and the last actual strike was circumvention. So I had a strike for cyberbullying for a video that was a couple months old after the COVID misinformation, after election misinformation. And then they gave me a circumvention strike because I posted on my second channel saying, hey guys, I got a strike. I can't stream for a week. I'll see you soon. And they said that I was circumventing the ban by still posting. And not only did they delete my 2 channels, but also any fan channel, anybody who had Sneako in the title that were uploading clips. And I allowed people to encourage people to go and clip it up and put it on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, IG Reels. They wiped it completely. And I even made new channels afterwards. Banned. They are actively trying to wipe it out. And that was played in the Senate committee for inspiring domestic terrorism, for platforming somebody that they call a Holocaust denier and singing a Jewish song.
And my question to you is, first of all, did these strikes happen within a very short period of time, or did it happen over a long period of time?
In a short period of time. It was about a little less than a month. And I even had some false strikes that they tried to get me for. At one point, I was wearing what I'm wearing now, wearing a tank top, and I was doing push-ups, and they gave me a nudity strike. And but I was able to appeal that. But I mean, there was a lot of instances of people were watching my stream on BotTube before I was banned. They saw that they were actively censoring it all the time. If I would talk about 9/11, suddenly the stream would just shut off in the middle. They saw me get played in the Senate. They saw them many times, like certain subjects, the stream would just freeze and the YouTube would say policy violation, stream off.
When did this thing start happening? Was there a turning point? Because from my understanding, your content or your character and your persona changed throughout your kind of public life. Maybe some of the things that you were saying in the beginning was more in line with some of the liberal values, and then you became a little bit more, I don't know, people say that you become red pill. Is that a fair assessment, or is that not a fair assessment?
I would say yes and no. There were certain ideas that I would follow that were liberal, but at the same time, I was undercover red pill for a long time. I voted for Trump in high school when I was 18. That was the first presidential election that I participated in. And I kept that secret for a while when I was in college because I didn't want to get called a racist Trump supporter. And as well, even back in 2015, I was talking about feminism and why that's a lie. And I was talking about how I was inspired by Malcolm X specifically. Obviously, shout out to, he had a transition from the Nation of Islam to actually going to Mecca and having his Hajj. Is that the correct terminology? You say you have your Hajj? Is that the right word to say it?
Yeah, Hajj, yeah, that's right.
You have your Hajj?
Yeah, you can say you've done a Hajj, or you've gone to pilgrimage, or you've gone to Hajj, or it's fine.
Yeah, I was talking about that. And
okay, so all this aside, I mean, this is so we're going to unpack, certain parts of it here and there, but what I'm noticing here, is I feel like I've that I'm accustomed to seeing interactions of these sorts, and I see genuine interest. I see genuine interest from Sneako here in knowledge, right?
How Malcolm X really inspired me, and I was talking about feminism as brainwashing, and I was talking a lot of red pill ideologies, but I would say the 1 minute podcast series, this was a street interview series I did in New York City. I still do it, but it's a little bit difficult now because of the cancellation. But I did this 1-minute podcast series where I'd set up a microphone and a table and in the middle of the subway stations in New York City. And so I just interview people, and I was asking questions that I really wanted to figure out what the public thought about, because there was these ideas being pushed in 2017, 2018, like fat acceptance. And I just asked people, is it okay to be fat? And seeing people try to justify why it's okay to be fat and not knowing why, or asking people, are men and women equal? Everybody really wanted to say, yes, men and women are equal, but they had no reasoning why. So figuring out that everybody was programmed to operate with feelings over facts, I think that really made me realize how much brainwashing there is in what I would say fully red pill.
And how has your life changed, like in terms of maybe not to be too personal about this, in terms of your, for example, finances or something like that, before and after YouTube? So, for example, now that you're on Rumble, I take it, and I don't know what other. I think you're on Twitter as well, of course.
Got my Twitter back.
Just recently been reinstated.
Yeah.
So you're on a couple of streams, but obviously YouTube has monetary advantages. So you can have advertisements, you can have sponsors, and all that. Have you taken a hit financially from this?
Well, when they canceled me off of YouTube, they froze about $200,000 from ad revenue. I was doing really well on Google AdSense. And one thing for anybody listening, if they terminate you, they keep all the money that they owe you. They froze my AdSense account as well. But financially, I just have to be more diligent now. And the truth is, Tristan Tate was telling me this, that you can't rely on AdSense. When you're talking about this, it's like there's no point in ever relying on advertisers. You need to start your own businesses. So I have my course, the Creativity Kit, that's doing really well. It's actually releasing tomorrow at midnight. I'm not sure when this is going to go up, but this is my private network where I teach people how to make money online. And I have a lesson every day from different wealth creation methods. And also it's a network of people who want to go and find like-minded people who want to make money online and start a business. So also Rumble.
Is it similar to Hustlers University, or?
It's more curated to a specific group. I'm only limiting it to 1,000 people because I do a lot of the lessons. I was in there last month 3 times a week talking to people and answering questions and teaching people, bringing on different professors from drop shipping and e-commerce, web design, crypto, trying to teach people and bring everything that I've learned. I've learned a lot in the past few months from a lot of different millionaires. And so I'm trying to bring that to my audience. So it's more curated and specific. And also it's a networking community. There's people in there that have met and actually moved together and started businesses together from that community, because I've always taken the idea that it's hard to find like-minded people with the circle that are around you. A lot of people that I grew up with, they're playing Fortnite, playing GTA, smoking weed, playing FIFA, doing the same things that we were doing back when we were 16, 17. And sure, that's fun. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm on a constant journey of growth, and I can't grow if people are constantly playing FIFA. So the people that I work with, I've all met them online, and I want to provide that for the people that watch my streams.
I see. And so you're talking about your own personal journey. Have you looked into Islam as a way of life that you could potentially embrace yourself at all?
Of course I have. I've been thinking about Islam for a long time. I think the first time that I was really seriously considering it, people will think that I'm lying about this, but I was really infatuated with Malcolm X when I was very young. His autobiography, seeing his journey and how he went from living a degenerate life, stealing, robbing, pimping, dealing drugs, and then finding Islam as well, first the Nation of Islam, but then finding, the true religion, which he called it, of Islam, and also seeing how he transitioned from being a militant person who was really pro segregation. The reason that he wasn't assassinated early was because he agreed with a lot of the white supremacists that Martin Luther King was fighting against. So Malcolm X was pro segregation, just on the opposite side. And he was realistic, and he was also warning people about white liberals, many Muslims coming to the meetups. And it really surprised me because I was saying I didn't believe in God and I was atheistic, but for some reason what I was talking about resonated with a lot of Muslim people. And a lot of people that I associate with and that have read and understood, they have found peace in Islam. And it seems like a sanctuary from all the degeneracy in the West. I moved out of New York City because I kept seeing what was going on, the pride parades, and how drag queens are in schools now, and what children are being exposed to.
What is your conception of God like? So, for example, of the two, which do you think is a more plausible conception of God? Would you say the Islamic conception, or would you say the Christian conception?
I see what you're saying, and that's some of the criticism I've had when I've been reading the Bible. The fact that God needed a day to rest. If He's all-knowing and all-powerful,
People in Africa and in Asia, and anyone knows how to answer it.
Yep.
If I were to ask you what is a woman, Sneako,
yeah,
I know this. I know you're going to give me the answer I need, but if I were to ask you what is a woman, what would you say?
A human with a vagina.
Okay, human with a vagina, fine. Or X chromosomes, or all of these are acceptable answers, right? Or
a woman born with a vagina.
Yeah, fine. But you know, but what would differentiate her from a girl, for example? From a young girl, like a baby girl.
Maturity. Physical maturity.
Physical maturity. Now you've just answered your question about the age of Aisha, because what I've just asked you, what is a woman, and so
part of the reason I had trouble and why I left the church is because I didn't like the idea that God was this guy, and I'm sure that there's
where God rests on the seventh day, where God wrestles with Jacob and loses the wrestling match. In creation, can ask the question why a dog doesn't crawl around, you know, and or say what am I doing here, you know? Many of those countries, which are Muslim majority countries, they have already been predicted to have, you know, by the Prophet Muhammad as countries which would be occupied by Islam. And these are just some examples. I mean, there are even examples of what's going to happen today in our times relating to the woke movement. You'll be very surprised about what the Prophet told us and what's going to happen. For instance, on the issue of degeneracy, which you mentioned, the Prophet Muhammad predicted in the hadith, which is authentic, that people will be doing fornication outside of marriage. There will come a time where people will be fornicating outside of marriage to a point where new diseases will be invented. It's not that they will just contract diseases, that new diseases will be invented. There'll be an advent of sexually transmitted diseases. That, in addition to the fact you were talking about crypto, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us something about the economics of today. He said that it will all be an interest-based system. The whole thing will be an interest-based system. And he mentioned, إِن لَمْ تَأْكُلْهُ إِن لَمْ يَأْكُلْهُ أَصَابَتْهُ مِنْ غُبَارٍ. That even if someone does not consume the interest-based system, the dust of it will be, he'll be afflicted by its dust. So the entire system, you might have gone to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and you've seen how tall some of the buildings are. Even that's been mentioned by the Prophet. He said in the future, the barefooted Arab will be competing with one another to create tall buildings. يَتَطَاوَلُونَ فِي الْبُنْيَانِ. This is mentioned in Bukhari, in the authentic source. That they'll be competing with, if you see the Saudi Arabians, they're competing now with the UAE and the Qatar, and they're all trying to create tall buildings. The fact that they have even the money to do that now, I mean, because the thing is, you could say, well, maybe it's a self-fulfilled prophecy, but you can't create a self-fulfilled prophecy if the economic resources are not available. I'm saying that there's a wealth of evidence. There's a wealth of evidence to show that the Prophet Muhammad was a true prophet.
We have
Having
the
heard
evidence.
that,
No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
are you convinced? To what extent are you satisfied with these evidences, or do you have anything to ask about those evidences?
Is the interest-based system?
Yes.
Does the Quran, is that considered haram?
Yes.
And that's created by who? Who created the interest-based system?
I mean, that's not really a religious question now. That's more of a question we can try and investigate ourselves.
Who do you think?
The Prophet didn't tell us who created it. He just said that it's going to be there in the future.
I have another question. This is all very good evidence, and I think you clarified a lot of things that I was curious about knowing.
Yeah.
Who do you think did 9/11?
I'll be honest, bro. Like, I'll be totally honest with you, right? There was a video, because obviously I watched Loose Change. I watched the documentary.
Those are garbage, though. Those are garbage documentaries.
Yes. I've watched all those documentaries and all those kind of things.
Because the Taliban recently came out. The Taliban just said that Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with 9/11. There's no evidence of that.
Yes, of course. But what I was going to say with that is, there was one thing which made me doubt the let's say, the conspiracy narrative, or the so-called conspiracy narrative, which is that it was an inside job. There was one thing that made me doubt it, which is there was a particular speaker, which as a child...
Yeah, I think that is probably, it's a great delineation there. The idea that it was an inside job that's just too far. That's way too far. I mean, whether or not that's true is the fact of the matter is, like, the evidence doesn't show. That's just too far based on the evidence. But the idea that Osama bin Laden is the Taliban, is Al Qaeda, is Saudi Arabia, is, I don't know, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Azerbaijan. I mean, like, do all of the people who necessarily consider Osama bin Laden and the Taliban and Al Qaeda and that narrative to be true, do they understand the difference between all of those groups? Yeah, not to say whether or not not to put into question whether or not they understand their involvement. Do they even understand the difference? Because that's where you start. The difference. It's like, oh, is it, are they a monolithic group or not? Right? Are they one or are they not one?
His name was Anwar al-Awlaki, very well known, and everyone used to listen to him. And he became like, he was attacked by the government and killed, and he engaged in extremism or whatever. Yeah. What I was going to say was, he came out on a video on YouTube, okay, and he started speaking about 9/11, and he started speaking about it in a way which seems to praise it, like as if it actually happened and it was praised and all this kind of things. So this, for me, put a spanner in the woodworks, because I can't for sure, I'll be honest with you, tell you that I know what happened on that day. Like, I wouldn't put my money on anything, on anybody or any story or anything. Like, if you say put your kid's life on one story or another, I would say I wouldn't put anyone's life on that. Because, to be honest with you, there's too many ambiguities and vagaries. And so that's my stance. I really don't have a strong opinion on the matter. I've seen some documentaries here and there, but I'm happy to be educated. I'm happy to be, to see documentaries and see evidences and so on. But I can't tell you for sure this is 100% or this is 100% what happened. I think there's problems. I've seen all the things, the evidence is like, the insurance company before and all that. I can't say for sure that means X or that means Y or that means Z. And that's why I don't really make a big deal about this issue, because I like to speak about things which I strongly believe in and that I can evidence without doubt. That one it's not really my area, if you see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
What do you think about the fact that and this is me speaking really candidly, part of the apprehension to embrace Islam is like the amount of people that are going to say that I'm just trying to copy Andrew Tate?
I mean, the thing is, that's a bit of a weird one, because
yeah, I don't know what Mohammed Hijab's going to say here, but that's just temporal. That's just the contemporary contemporary take on it. I mean, a lot of people may remember Andrew Tate 15 years from now. They may remember that a person who was aware of Andrew Tate converted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll associate those so strongly as they do in the current time, in the time that it happens.
I mean, at the end of the day, there were greater figures than Andrew Tate in the cultural history of America that have become Muslim. You've mentioned one of them, which is Malcolm X. Are you somewhat African American, or are you fully?
My dad
Asian?
is Haitian. My dad is half black. He's from Haiti.
Yeah. So okay. So someone has African American roots, and you mentioned Malcolm X. See, as you're speaking, I would probably, if I had to guess, I would probably say you're probably more inspired. You find him more of a figure of inspiration than probably Andrew Tate. And is that correct?
That's correct. And what also do you think about I'm getting a lot of criticisms from the woke left about the fact that, like, I mean, I do engage in premarital sex, and I promote, like, a lot of people think that I want to convert to Islam just for the 4 wives, and that, like, Islam promotes misogyny, stuff like that. What do you think is the proper response to that?
Look, I mean, it's very difficult to have 4 wives or even 2 wives, because when we talk about having wives, it's not the same as having mistresses. These people are part of your life. You've been in relationships before, and you see this emotional baggage. You know, you have to provide for these people. You have to put up with, you have to put up with them, and so on, and their parents, and the extended families. You have to put up with. Imagine 2 of that. So if you had 1 relationship, imagine doubling this. This is a burden actually on the man. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they'll take the risk from the houses and so on, and looking up. And that if he chooses an idea like Islam, or he's copying that one, or he's doing this, or he's doing, why can't it just be that it makes sense to him? It just makes sense to him. It makes sense to so many people. I myself, I don't know how many, maybe tens of thousands, and this is not an over-exaggeration, the people that either have become Muslim with me, I've seen them, I've told them what I've just told you, and they become Muslim, just like you've seen in Hyde Park, or on the internet, or they declare it somewhere, or through it. So it's not something which is abnormal. So if they say, well, he's trying to copy this one, or it's ridiculous, really. I mean, why would you need to copy?
And it's also, that's a stupid reason to not follow what you really believe in. That's
Exactly.
not, it's living for the people. I'm just,
you have big figures, like you had, like in the cultural history of America, you had Muhammad Ali, you had Malcolm X, you just mentioned Khabib Nurmagomedov. In many ways, these are all these figures, without exception, are higher rank in terms of social clout than Andrew Tate.
What was your experience? I saw you. I didn't watch the podcast, but what did you think after his conversion?
I thought it was authentic, bro. Like, I sat with him, I spoke with him. I think he's a man that, if you believe in one God, and you believe in what we call the fitra, it's a natural sense of morality, which is like, you have to protect your woman, and you have children, and this is called the fitra, the natural predisposition. It's pretty easy to become a Muslim. It is pretty easy, especially as you've mentioned, in a world where we're seeing all this kind of nonsense happening. It's kind of, for me, it's sickening. And I think what you started off with is actually correct in terms of characterization. When you said that this is a religion of the West, this is absolutely correct. Because first of all, someone will object and say, well, it's not a religion because, a Cambridge definition or Cambridge Dictionary definition or Merriam-Webster definition of the word religion includes things like rituals and divination and so on. The truth is, sociologically, the word religion can mean a system of ideas which tries to explain the world that we live in. For example, Charles Taylor, great sociologist, had the same idea that you said in the beginning, which is that a religion is not just a divining in rituals. It's ideas that shape the world. And nowadays,
they do have rituals. They do have their rituals are protests, climate change protests, and the degenerate things they do. I would say that there's a ritualistic aspect of this, of what they practice.
That is a very powerful point. And look, think of it this way: me and you now, when you were in school,
the rituals are protests.
World that we live in. For example, Charles Taylor, great sociologist, had the same idea that you said in the beginning, which is that a religion is not just a divining in rituals. It's ideas that shape the world. And nowadays,
they do have rituals. They do have rituals are protests, climate change protests, and
that you said in the beginning, which is that a religion is not just a divining in rituals. It's ideas that shape the world. And nowadays,
they do have rituals. They do have their rituals are protests, climate change protests, and the degenerate things they do. I would say that there's a ritualistic aspect of what they
that is a very powerful point. And look, think of it this way. Me and you now, when you were in school, we could have, there's religious education and so on. So maybe they'll teach you about maybe the ancient Greeks. They say, look, they used to believe in a goddess called Athena, right? Or Zeus, you've heard of Zeus, Hercules, and so on. So look, that's what they used to believe in. Okay? And so we'll all look at each other in the classroom and say, why did such a clever people believe in such silly things? That's what we're all thinking. But that is, I would say, it's a more plausible idea than the ideas that they have now, and I'll explain why. At least when the ancient peoples were believing in Zeus, the man with the beard in the sky, basically, which both me and you don't agree with, and we cannot imagine that could be a god. But even then, when they looked at Zeus and said, that's God, that is the god of thunder, or the god of whatever, the top god or whatever, even then, it is not as bad as saying X is Y. And that's what they're doing. They're looking at a woman and saying that woman is not a woman. That woman is whatever she wants to be. So she can decide to be a man. She can decide to be a penguin. She can decide to be whatever I decide to be.
Your inconsistencies
and then it
are
becomes
glaringly obvious. Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
Ridiculous to a point of comicality, laughable comicality. I was looking at this case recently. This individual, transgender. Well, he wasn't a transgender in the beginning. He was a man, and then he raped somebody in England. And this is the BBC just had the thing. I'm not sure if you saw it.
Sorry.
And then, he decided to change, and then they put him into a female's, prison and so on. And then they took him out.
Pretty smart idea.
Yeah, it's a smart idea. I mean, even a Muslim guy, he was taken away from his kid, because as you know, in the West, this is one thing I totally agree with the Red Pill on. In the West, the idea of like a man having rights to his children and so on, if a woman just accuses him, she can accuse him of domestic violence, abuse, or whatever, the Me Too, whatever it may be, and this guy can never see his kid for the rest of his life. It could happen. It's definitely, I know people that it's happened to in the United Kingdom, and it does happen in the United States. So this guy, Muslim guy, his wife, scorned, very bitter woman, immoral woman, went and tried to stop him from seeing his kids using the legal system. Okay, now what he did is that he went and he said, I'm a woman now. He transitioned. He pretended to transition, and as a result, now he's the mother. So now it's flipping everything on his head. It's a ridiculous notion. And what I'm saying is that when you refer to it in the religion as a religion in the beginning of this podcast, I think it was fitting, because anthropologists 100 years from now may very well look at our times, just like we're looking at the ancient Greek people, and say that whereas the ancient Greeks, they believed in gods they couldn't prove, they couldn't see, our people, they were looking at things they could see, and they were saying they were not the things they could see. It's even more severe than believing about something without evidence, because you're rejecting the evidence. What's more severe than believing in something without evidence is to reject the evidence in favor of that which you believe.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.
Yeah, so remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'd like to thank Muhammad Hijab and Revenge of the Sis and Sticks and Hammers 666 and everyone whose clips were used today. And I'm gonna open up a channel. And we will see you another time. Thank you.